Well, good afternoon, America. Today I want to focus on what may be the last bastion of defense against our rather sudden transition into an effective and present de facto totalitarian dictatorship, and that is the judiciary. In recent days, it has begun to fight back against the Trump regime and their intense campaign in widespread abuse of power and their assault on the rule of law. Judges at all levels of the federal system are now resisting the threats to American democracy. All too apparent from illicit and unconstitutional actions taken by the Trump regime following the 2025 playbook. And this even includes the fascist majority Supreme Court that created the monster in our midst by granting him and them, and by implication, his sycophants, immunities from prosecution for their crimes against the United States and its citizens, including all others within her jurisdiction. But is it too little, too late? After all, the evidence in front of us from the latest court cases, the majority of them in regard to immigration, arrest, deportation, and imprisonment, is that the Trump regime is prepared to and has ignored court orders, including those from the Supreme Court that repudiate the illegal and unlawful nature of the executive abuse of power and usurpation of authority that it does not have within our constitutional order. In my opinion, it's too little, too late. While the courts may now take decisions that favor the preservation of our democracy, they lack the power of the sword and the purse and have not an army to enforce these decisions. And Trump is brazenly attacking judges, law firms, and even prosecuting a member of Congress and the mayor of the city of Newark, creating further serious threats to the constitutional order and the rule of law. So, what power exists to prevent the Trump regime from merely ignoring these decisions, as it has been in cases such as the Abrego Garcia case, whenever it considers it necessary to further entrench its totalitarian 1984-like plan, its 2025 plan, on top of our Constitution, rule of law, and sense of civil and human rights. Despite the fact that the United States is a signatory to international treaty law protecting the rights of individuals to seek asylum, men like Garcia have been arrested, detained, deported, and incredibly imprisoned in a foreign nation from which the courts seem absolutely incapable of effecting his return. Grounded in Article 14 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, 1948, which recognizes the right of persons to seek asylum from persecution in other countries, the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees was adopted as far back as 1951 and is the centerpiece of international refugee protection today. The convention was entered into force on 22nd of April 1954, and it has been subject to only one amendment in the form of a 1967 protocol signed by the United States government, which removed the geographic and temporal limits on the 1951 convention. And I must remind everyone that international treaty law comes within or falls within the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution and is the supreme law of the land. So, the answer in practical terms to opposition and effective political and judicial control is none, nada, zip, zero. The Trump regime holds all of the real reins of power, controlling as they do the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, as well as a theoretical control over the military, while his Congress is complacent and under his thumb. And so, unfortunately, the answer in practical terms to opposition being nada, zip, and zero leaves us almost nowhere to go. He can and will, if push comes to shove, declare yet another national emergency, effectuate the Insurrection Act, and have the military declare martial law while suspending the writ of habeas corpus as well as Article 3 courts. And there are plenty of examples of his doing this available to review. He already has declared emergencies, especially on our southern border, and has sent troops there despite posse comitatus constraints. He has tried to use a wartime act, the Alien Enemies Act, to arrest, detain, deport, and imprison immigrants. He has announced through Stephen Miller his intentions on the suspension of habeas corpus, an inalienable constitutional right incorporated in the Judiciary Act of 1789. In summary, Trump can interfere with, pervert, or even cancel elections, or have them and lose while refusing to leave office, doing far more damage than his insurrection of January 6th, and as Tom Hartman has pointed out, this is now a dictatorship. Even the normally hopeful Mark Elias seems to be pessimistic about democracy's survival. In these circumstances, as manifested and given a realistic appraisal, it is not very difficult to imagine the people whose civil, human, and constitutional rights have been obliterated taking to the streets and the civil war ensuing, which would follow with more disastrous consequences than we could ever have contemplated. So, let me think more on it. Let you think on it. Subscribe. Let me have your views. Thank you.